Welcome to This Explainer. You know, when we think of Wall Street today, we immediately picture glowing red and green numbers, right? Algorithms executing massive trades in actual milliseconds. But long before global finance lived on screens, it lived on paper. And somebody had to print that paper with absolute, uncompromising perfection. Today, we're diving into the incredible journey of Bowne Company. This was a simple colonial store that somehow survived for centuries to become the literal backbone of modern corporate communications.
I mean, really think about the sheer scale of the timeline we're dealing with here. A year and a half before the Declaration of Independence was even signed, we're talking February 1775, a 31-year-old merchant named Robert Bowne opens his doors. This wasn't just a company that existed during American history. It practically grew up right alongside the United States. It survived wars, it survived depressions, and it survived massive technological shifts. It's a wild ride.
So here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at their roots in the Revolution. Second, building the infrastructure of Wall Street. Third, how the SEC changes absolutely everything. Fourth, navigating the digital age. And finally, their legacy of communication. Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, Roots in the Revolution, Surviving the Birth of a Nation.
Picture this. It's 1775, and Bowen's store on Queen Street in New York isn't some towering financial institution. Not at all. It was just a humble dry goods store. They sold writing paper and quills, sure, but they also sold binding materials, furs, nails, and, as one old newspaper ad actually put it, a few casks of low-priced cutlery. Robert Bowne was really just trying to provide the basic, everyday supplies that a growing colonial city needed. But as you can probably guess, history was about to severely interrupt those plans. Just a single year after the store opened, August 1776, British troops defeated George Washington's forces at Brooklyn Heights. Robert Bowne had to literally flee New York with his family, just totally leaving his brand new business behind. When he finally made it back in the 1780s, the city was in absolute shambles. But he rebuilt. And this is crucial. He began focusing heavily on stationery supplies. It was a brilliant adaptation because he realized a newly independent nation was going to need an awful lot of paper to run its government and its businesses.
Moving right along to Section 2, Infrastructure of Wall Street, Rebuilding and Standardizing Finance.
So things are going well, but survival was honestly never guaranteed. In 1835, the Great Fire of New York wipes out 17 city blocks. The Bowne store, completely destroyed. Gone. But the Bowne brothers, who had taken over after Robert passed away, they just rebuilt from the ashes again. And this time, they planted themselves right at the corner of Wall, Pearl, and Beaver Streets. They were now physically rooted right in the soil of America's emerging financial district.
By this point in the 19th century, they definitely weren't just selling paper and nails anymore. They were producing massive leather-bound account books for banks, specialized railroad stock certificates, and these really complex corporate annual reports. See, as railroads started stretching across the continent, companies needed capital, which meant they needed investors. And to communicate with those investors, they needed standardized, highly secure, hard-to-forge documents. Bowne wasn't just printing paper. They were basically creating the physical infrastructure that allowed Wall Street to function.
That brings us to Section 3. The SEC changes everything. Regulation creates opportunity. 1933. Mark that year, because it is an absolute watershed moment for corporate America. Following the devastating stock market crash of 1929, the federal government steps in and establishes the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC. Their main goal? Regulate the financial industry and protect investors. And for a printing company like Bowne, this was the ultimate game changer. It was a game changer specifically because of documents like the prospectus. The SEC now required, by federal law, that publicly traded companies issue these incredibly detailed legal documents explaining their exact financial condition to investors. Financial printing was no longer just about making a certificate look pretty. It was about absolute flawless precision. I mean, think about it. A single misplaced comma or one incorrect number could trigger a massive lawsuit or violate federal law. Bowne already had a stellar reputation for accuracy, so suddenly their services became highly lucrative and utterly indispensable.
To put that into perspective, let's look at the numbers. During the 1930s, the Great Depression was brutal. Bowne was essentially in survival mode, with their annual sales totally stagnant, right around $300,000. But once the economy started recovering and those new SEC regulations were fully in play, everything shifted. By 1946, right in the middle of the post-WW2 boom, their annual sales surged past $1 million. They had successfully morphed from a neighborhood stationery store into an elite financial printer, riding this massive wave of regulatory compliance.
On to Section 4, Navigating the Digital Age, from paper to the internet.
So now we're jumping forward, going from physical ink, those heavy metal paper presses, and actually hand-delivering documents via couriers, all the way to instantaneous digital distribution, HTML and global networks. The world was changing fast. Paper was becoming pixels, and while a lot of traditional printers looked at the computer age and literally saw their doom, Bowne was smart. They realized their core competency actually wasn't putting ink on paper. It was securely managing and communicating highly complex financial information.
So how did they adapt this time? Well, in 1984, the SEC introduced a voluntary electronic filing program called EDGAR. Bowne was literally the very first corporation to join it. They completely modernized their entire workflow. Step 1, they acquired client data over their own proprietary digital network, which they called BoundLink. Step 2, they formatted and filed that data directly into the SEC's digital EDGAR system. And step 3, they instantly converted those highly technical filings into HTML or PDFs for the client's own corporate websites. They weren't just a printer anymore. They were a comprehensive information management service.
And the result of that massive digital pivot? $716 million. That was Bowne's revenue in 1997. No joke. They didn't just survive the transition to the internet. They absolutely thrived in it. By completely redefining themselves from a standard printer to an information solutions provider, they managed to capture a massive share of the booming late 90s financial markets.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, A Legacy of Communication, the final chapter of independence. To keep up with the crazy demands of modern global business, they expanded even further beyond the press. They launched Bowne Business Solutions for document outsourcing, Bowne Global Solutions, which localized software into 15 different languages, and Bowne Internet Solutions for high-end web consulting. They were doing it all. But eventually, this massive scale and the constantly shifting economic tides led to the end of their incredible run as an independent entity. They were eventually acquired by R.R. Donnelley, folding a truly staggering 2-century legacy into a much larger corporate structure. So what is the big takeaway from all of this? Bowne's story is really a masterclass in adaptation. From selling quills in colonial New York to managing encrypted digital databases, they survived because they were never afraid to evolve. The medium completely changed from parchment to pixels, but the core need for reliable, precise business communication, that is permanent. So as we look at things like AI and decentralized finance today, it makes you wonder, what will be the exact next revolution in corporate communication? Keep that in mind the next time you're scrolling through an annual report. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep learning.